Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and welcome to another Footloose Friday. And this is our monthly foot club where I demonstrate a different set of feet or one BERNINA foot or, different things that go together. We make a pennant just to kind of save our swatches. And then you get to learn a lot about different feet. So basically how this works is this video is free. You can watch it anytime for as long as you want, all of that stuff. But if you want our handout and all of our other tips, this interactive presentation deck that we put together for you that you get if you purchase the Footloose Friday for $15 on our BERNINA of Naperville website actually has a lot of other links to other information, other tutorials, other things where we have used these feet and other projects. So if that is interesting to you, I really invite you to sign up. So today's foot is the number 10 edge stitch foot. Now there are three styles of those. There's a 10, a 10C, and a 10D. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But it's really like one of the first feet I ever got, and I think you're really going to like it. So let's get down to business and look through this presentation deck.
Just a little bit of housekeeping here. What you're looking at is our Footloose Friday interactive presentation deck. And in this presentation deck are the important links to get the template, to watch the video tutorial here, and all of those things. Now, you get this presentation deck emailed to you when you sign up at BERNINAofNaperville.com for our Footloose Friday session. Now, we sell those separately, and we do one every Friday on the last Friday of the month. So this month's topic is the number 10, number 10C, and number 10D edge stitch foot. And with that, I always put it into this cute pennant. And it's just a way that, you make these samples, you try things, you do stuff, and then it's just a way to have a little something to decorate your sewing room so that you're making stuff that you're not throwing away, that you actually kind of are motivated to display it in some way. So this month, we're going to learn using the edge stitch feet, how to stitch in the ditch, do understitching, top stitch straps, joining batting, binding, and tuxedo tucks. There's going to be a few supplies that you're going to need. Fabric-wise, assorted scraps to try all of our various techniques. But then I made this little tuxedo pennant, and I used a fat quarter of white fabric. We used the Pure Solids cotton, and we used snow and caviar. Also, I give the pennant its rigidity by using a cutaway stabilizer, and you're going to need a 10-inch by 14-inch piece. I stick things together with 505 spray, and you're also going to need rotary cutter, mat, and rulers, a stiletto, some paper to print your template on, small scissors, tweezers, or a sewing awl, and a water-soluble pen or other favorite marking pen. The star of the show is the number 10 edge stitch foot. And every month we do have a special on our featured feet. So this month it is 25% off those 4 edge stitch feet that you see right there. There is the standard number 10. There's the legacy number 10. Those are for the older machines like those old 830s in the red case. Then there is a 10C for the coated machines that take 9mm wide stitch capabilities. And then there's 10D, which is for the machines that have dual feed and 9mm wide capabilities. So when you purchase your feet or you have these in the cart, you just want to make sure that you're using all caps for your discount. So let's look at the edge stitch feet. So the main thing about these feet is that there's this centrally located blade that's used to align the edge of fabric, seams, and, when you're butting up 2 pieces of fabric together. And on most BERNINAs, that's all the new BERNINAs, 4 series up through the 990, is there are 11 needle positions. And even on the 5.5mm machines, there's 11 needle positions. And then on the 10C and the 10D, they're just a little bit more scooched together on the narrow feed dog machines, like the 735, the 535, and so forth. The only machine where the needle positions are less than 11 needle positions is on the 3 series, the 325 and 335. So let's have a little closer look at some of these feet.
First, we have the Bernina number 10 edge stitch foot. Now, this is a foot, you don't see any coating on the side. This is what you're going to use on like your Bernina 215, 3 series, like the 325, the 335, or even some of those 330s, 350s, 380s out there. This might also be used for an Aurora 440 or 430 or various machines like that. Any newer machine, maybe circa 1995 and older, with a 5.5 millimeter stitch width. That would be the width of the needle there. Now, no matter what kind of edge stitch foot that you get, you're going to see that there's a little blade down the middle, and that little guy is a guide to run along certain things so that when you're top stitching or you're stitching in the ditch or you're doing something, you have a reference point from which you can set your needle position and things like that. So that is the purpose of this foot, and I'm going to take you through all of the different uses of these feet. Now, the first thing we're going to do is just using the number 10 foot and how, that can be really beneficial. The next level of the number 10 foot would be the one with this coating on the side. That is a magic eyeball, and that eyeball is read by the machine so that it knows that it's safe to do 9 millimeter stitching. So hold up these different feet here. You can see this is the 5.5 millimeter one. See that opening is not quite as wide as that opening because of the difference in what the machines can do. So this foot is going to be used on any machine with a 9 millimeter. Now that means even the Artista 180, 200, 185, 640, 730 machines, but also our newer machines like the 480, the 570, 590, 7 series like the 740, 770, 790, and the 880 machines. And so there's some times when that's all you need. But then when you're working with some quilting material or batting or things like that, you might need dual feed. So the machines with dual feed also take 9 millimeter stitches. So here is a dual feed foot, and that one is the 10D for dual feed. Now, I've kind of broken down our projects today so that we can see how you would use the different feet and why you might want a 10, a 10C, or a 10D. And quite honestly, I'm going to tell you something. If you have a Bernina machine with the 9 millimeter, you're probably not really going to use this regular number 10. You're going to use this one. But sometimes you might need the dual feed. So let's have a look at how we use this foot. So one of the things that you're going to need to learn to do for this application, it's super easy. You're just going to need to know how to change your needle position. So if you're using a Bernina 4 through an 8 series machine, they are external buttons on your machine right below your multifunction knobs, and you have a variety of different needle positions. So you have center needle position, and then you have multiple positions to the left and multiple positions to the right. Now, if you're working with a Bernina 3 series machine or a 215. And so that's how you're going to change your needle position. And you just need to play around. Now, one of the rules is that the thicker the fabric, the further you move your needle away from the edge just because it's thicker. So also sometimes with top stitching, the thicker the material, the longer you make your stitch length. So you might want to also be mindful that you're going to need to adjust your stitch length as well. Finally, on that joining the batting stitch that we're going to be using, the rampart stitch that I used, I did elongate just a little bit, and this is really just a personal preference. I start off somewhere, just tweaking it a little bit longer than I need.
So for our first exercise, we're going to do stitch in the ditch. Now, this technique is used in many segments of sewing. In quilting, we've seen stitch in the ditch of a seam using the quilt block or the border pieces as the pattern for the quilting, but quite commonly it's used in sewing on bindings. In apparel, it's used for waistbands, cuffs, and collars, anywhere that you have to fasten something, but you don't want the stitching to be visible from the front. And then, of course, in crafting, there's bag making, there's sewing tabs on pennants. Hint, hint. The sky is the limit, really, of where you could apply this technique. You're going to set your machine for a straight stitch with the needle position in the center. You're going to attach your favorite version of the number 10 edge stitch foot. I use the standard number 10 for 5.5 millimeter machines, but you could use the 10D or the 10C as well. And we're literally going to stitch in the ditch, keeping an eye to sew on the non-bulky part of the seam because you're going to avoid the stitching looking like top stitching. So let's have a look. So here's our foot on our machine. Right now, my needle is at the center needle position, which is aligned perfectly. If I can move this for you, with our metal guide. So here is what we're going to be sewing in our first example. It's kind of the typical waistband type configuration. So we've got a material with an interfacing, and it's been serged. And the idea is that we're going to stitch right in that ditch and catch the other side of our waistband, and that is called stitch in the ditch. So let's do stitch in the ditch. So we're using a straight stitch, no adjustments at all. I have a white thread in the top and bottom, and I'm going to line this guy up right there, right with that guide, right in the ditch, just like that. Sometimes when I stitch in the ditch, and I learned this from my friend Catherine Redford, is that you take your stiletto and you plow the path as you sew. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I have learned that this has turned me into an amazing sewist. Now, there's no dual feed or anything like that on this foot. This is just a basic foot with 5 millimeter capability. So now we have stitch in the ditch. And the idea with stitch in the ditch is that you're just going on the non-bulky side to do your stitching, but that is a pretty good example and it makes me pretty happy. Okay, so let's look at the other side. So then you see the other side, you can just see my stitching right above my serging line. So my stitch in the ditch looks exactly like what it's supposed to look like. The next example that we're going to do is understitching. And I did a lot of understitching when I used to sew bridal. And understitching is a term that's used to keep your facing and your linings from turning to the right side of the garment. It's also done before you press, and it really assists in keeping everything nice and flat and professional looking. You might also see it used to keep the lining of pockets, out of the visibility from the outside of, or the right side of the garment. It's used to line bags, and it's used in quilts that have faced edges, not the bound kind. Whenever you're doing this, like in this example, I'm doing a little mock facing piece. So you're going to interface the facing using fusee knit or armor weft. You're going to sew the facing on and clip your seams. You attach the foot, whichever one you want to use, 10C or 10D, and set the needle position 2 clicks to the left. Then you're going to stitch with the facing on the left side and the bulk of the seam on the left. Align the seam to the blade of the number 10 foot, and it is acceptable to elongate the stitch length if the fabric is thicker. Let's have a look. So here's an example where I learned how to use my number 10 foot, the very first Bernina that I ever had. I was doing custom made garments and things like that, and I was doing it for understitching. So in this application, here's our fabric for our shirt or whatever, and then this is our facing right here. I'm simply going to cut, because when you stitch you do your understitching, it's time to turn this inside out. And the understitching's job in life is to hold this guy under so it will be nice and flat. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut about just somewhat under a quarter of an inch around this neckline, just like this. Because, you know, in garments, they use that really fat seam allowance, 5/8 of an inch. And so it's less than a quarter of an inch, but more than 1/8 of an inch. That is as accurate as I can tell you to cut. So once you get that, then you're going to cut your little cuts that are going to help you turn this inside out without any puckering. And the curvier the piece, the more of these little cuts you need to make. Okay, so now I'm happy with that. So now, actually, I do this step before I do any pressing or anything like that. So the idea is that I'm going to turn this inside out, and I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to stitch this down with the bulk of my seam heading towards this gray. So now my guide is going right along here. Now, I'm no longer stitching in the ditch. I'm going to move my needle position 3 clicks to the left. So now as we stitch, and we're still lining our little ditch along the center guide on this foot, but I'm going to be wiggling and smushing this along, keeping my seam allowance on this side. If you look here, I want to make sure that this seam allowance here is all on that side of the piece, because that's what you're going to be stitching down. So it's going to just curl over nicely when you make this facing. And I am kind of using my fingers to kind of spread that seam open just a little bit. Okay, and now I'm going to cut, and now let's see what this looks like. So look at that really close stitching. And now that's going to be on the underside of this, because this gets folded over and pressed perfectly. So now this is the kind of situation where you want that nice looking neckline, but you don't want to do top stitching. So you top stitch with that understitching under there to keep the bulk out of the way and everything totally pretty.
Top stitching straps. Well, I do this a lot when I'm making Bonaparte a leash or a key fob or something like that. And this technique allows us to make professional looking straps. This method can also be translated to other top stitch applications like pockets, straight line applique, and more things. For the top stitch straps, you're just going to cut like a strip 4 inches wide by 12 inches and interface that with a craft interfacing like SF101. You're going to press the strip in half longwise and then fold the long edges to meet each other in the center and press again. Then finally, you're going to press it in half longwise, matching the folded edges together. And what this is giving you is 4 solid layers of fabric that is suitable for a strap, a handle on a bag, dog leash, collar, something like that. Then you're going to attach your favorite foot. This might be a job for the 10C or even maybe a 10D foot. You're going to move the needle position all the way to the left this time, just for fun. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder as to the exact needle position you choose.
and then stitch. Let's have a look at it.
All right, so I've switched to the 10C foot for no other reason other than you have a little bit more range of needle position. So I have like a bag handle here. We've all made these before. I have interfacing in here, and then this is actually a 4-inch piece that's folded over an inch, and then folded in half again. So this one is one of those where you can do 3 notches over, or if you have the 9mm wide capabilities and you want to do a little bit wider stitch on like a bag handle or something, I'm going to go ahead and move this over to the left the full amount that I possibly can, which is 5 notches. So let's zoom in here and see what the difference is. So I'm going to lower my presser foot down, and now I'm just going to stitch. Now, in all honesty, for the most part, I wouldn't top stitch this far away on a handle, but you could if you wanted to. And this, I can just like lift, stitch, lift, and finish off. You know, some people feel like the thicker the material, the further away from the edge you should top stitch. And also, if you wanted, you could also lengthen your stitch for this. There we go.
I have a lot of batting scraps, and so quite often I'm always short like 6 inches on my batting. So I often join batting. And, you know, I'm sure any of you that are quilters, you must be in the same boat as me. So it's pretty easy to join the batting using the number 10 foot as well. Although this time we're going to deviate from our standard straight stitching and use a number 12 rampart stitch. It's number 12 on the 790 Pro. And you're going to adjust the length somewhere between 1mm and 2mm. Cut the batting by layering them on top of each other, overlapping by about 5 inches. And then when you cut a gentle curve and pull them apart, you're going to have like this curve. And you keep a curve in the batting because this way, if there was a lumpy, just straight seam there, you might see it through your quilt. And so now let's take it over to the machine and have a look.
Okay, so now I'm putting on my number 10 D foot, making sure that every time you use a D foot, you pull the dual feed lever down. And I'm gonna pick a stitch. It's called the rampart stitch. And on my 790 plus, it's stitch number 12. And I'm elongating the stitch a little bit. So here is an example. And I don't know if you quilt, but I have been known to do a quilt or two. I dabble, some might say. So I am gonna sew this batting together because, dun, 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 I piece my batting sometimes. You know, I get a lot of pieces that are like 48 inches wide and I have a 60-inch wide quilt, but I find that sometimes if I just join them together, I can save a little bit, particularly when they're shop samples. So if you look here, you'll see that I have cut this at a gentle curve. And the reason why I do that is because when you piece your batting together on a curve, you don't get some weird looking lump that's inexplicable when the quilt is hanging on the wall. So if you do like a gentle curve, it's less noticeable. But regardless, I'm taking my batting and I'm going to join this together by butting up my 2 pieces together just like this. So now I can line my foot up right down the middle of this intersection. And then I'm going to stitch my little rampart stitch. And it's taking a stitch on either side.
So it takes a stitch to the left, comes down, takes a stitch, then goes to the right, comes over to the left, right, left. And so it just keeps doing this formation as we stitch. And my only job is to make sure that I keep these pieces butted up against each other. And of course, I'm using my dual feed because that's going to help feed my batting through the machine because it is a little fluffy. We're done. I'll give it a little pressing, and then you'll see how absolutely super flat that came out and invisible.
And now one of the most popular things that you'll probably do with your number 10 foot, if you're a quilter, is use it for binding. Now, of course, there's several ways to attach binding. Using the edge stitch foot, you can sew the binding to the top of the quilt and bring the binding around to the back, stitching in the ditch like we did in our previous exercise. But I like to sew the binding to the back of the quilt, then bring it around to the front to do perfect top stitching. I usually cut a 2.5 inch wide strip for the binding and fold it in half long ways and press. Then I sew it on. So let's have a look at our little example here in our video on how this process is done.
We do this one all the time, ladies and gentlemen. So here is a quilt sandwich. And here's a binding. So what I do, if this were the back of my binding, when I sew on a piece, I do a 2.5 inch strip, fold it in half, and then I use like the edge of my number 10 foot. So you can see here from the edge to that blade, which would be my center needle position, is the width that I'm using there. And that comes out to be about 3/8 of an inch. Nonetheless, I am going to go back to my straight stitch for this one. And since I've already stitched this on, so when I do a binding, I'm going to stitch this on with my 10D, but I don't care about the guide. I'm just going to use the side of the foot to stitch it onto the back. Then I'm going to fold and stitch the front part. And I want the front to be pretty. So that's why I stitch from the back and then do the front. Because sometimes, you know, the back, it doesn't catch it perfectly, particularly if I didn't cut it straight or whatever the case is. So then this is one of those situations where I'm going to move my needle position 3 clicks to the right. But notice that my little fold here is right on the edge of the blade on the other side. So now I'm just going to go ahead and stitch this out. Here we go. And now that's going to catch my binding so that my little binding job looks perfect. And there it is, a perfectly sewn binding completely by machine. So this was the top right here. Now let's have a look on the back. Now, if I move my needle maybe 1 notch more to the right, I could have had the back look just perfect. But you know what? In the greater scheme of things, that's good enough for me.
All right, so now I wanted to show you how to do tuxedo tucks. And tuxedo tucks can be done several different ways. And it all depends on how big you want to make your tuxedo tucks. And you're probably like, well, Gayle, what are tuxedo tucks? Well, they're different from pin tucks, which are made with a double needle and meant to stand up and not be pressed down to be flat. Tuxedo tucks are stitched like a seam and then pressed to the side with a single needle. And so the setup of the machine is that we're going to have matching thread in the top and bottom to the fabric that you're using. And then the needle position is going to determine how big that tuck is. So before we get started, on a 15 by 14 inch piece of white fabric, we want to measure and draw a vertical line down the center. Then from the center line, we want to measure 5 lines to the right, spacing them all a ½ inch apart, and then do the same thing on the left side, measuring 5 lines ½ inch apart. Now, with a Microtex needle, size 80, and your number 10 foot of your choice, we're going to fold on the first line to the right of the center line, and we're going to move the needle position 1 click to the left. And we're going to place that folded edge against the left side of the blade of the edge stitch foot and stitch. And it's going to go really, really, really close to that fold, and you have to really pay attention or you can accidentally get off of the fold. But then once you do that, you're going to turn your work around and do the same thing to the line on the left side of the center. So the first tuck on both the left and right side of the center line is 1 notch over. And then we're just going to repeat on the second line doing the same thing, but we're going to move our needle 1 notch closer to the left. And then that's why we have 5 lines marked on either side of our piece, because there's 5 needle positions to the right of the needle and there's 5 needle positions to the left. So we're just going to keep moving that needle over as we do each piece. And then eventually you get our finished piece that I embellished with some little black oblong stitches, and then I sewed it into my pennant. And I did do a special little thing. I kind of sewed a little neckline into our tuxedo shirt here, making a fake little facing. Then I put that on a piece of white fabric that I then stuck to our pennant stabilizer, trimmed a black piece of fabric, and then did my zigzag stitching along the edge of my pennant, lining it up to the guide on the edge stitch foot with my zigzag stitch, moved 3 notches to the left of the center. And then I added our facing like we've done, using my number 10 foot and the needle position all the way to the right. So there you have it.
What do you think? Sounds like fun, right? I am going to go make some garments. I'm going to do, maybe Bonaparte needs a new leash or whatever. I'm going to employ some of these techniques because these are some of the ones I use all the time. So if you want to see more videos like this one, don't forget to check out our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville. And there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Happy sewing!